Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's been a little bit. This would be, episode 7 of Beeps Media. This is another White Sox Wasteland for you. I've been thinking about doing some more Bulls stuff. They obviously made some moves at a draft pick, but we're still in the middle of baseball season, so there's been a little bit of activity. We're still a few days out from the trade deadline. As I record this, it's Sunday, July 21st. Obviously, everybody today is talking about the huge news, which is that the White Sox signed Nick Senzel to a major league contract and DFA'd Lenny Sosa a few days ago. That's all anybody can talk about anywhere, even here in New York City. As we speak, the White Sox are like 27 and 72, I think. Still 0-0 against Kansas City. They're going to see if they can avoid getting swept. And I know this is odd timing. We're still a few days out from the trade deadline. There's presumably some activity to be had. Paul DeYoung, Tommy Pham, possibly Crochet, possibly Fetty might all go, and it would be, we'll see where everything lands after that point. But in the meantime, there have been some transactions, and there's still more sort of signs. I've talked about this a little bit where I'm not really assessing what the major league team specifically is doing. It's clear that they're terrible. They didn't really try to win this year. And I'm kind of trying to gauge what the new front office, if their processes are effective, if it looks like they know what they're doing, basically. And we've talked about him before as well, but, they DFA'd Martin Maldonado a few days ago, finally. I think his signing is one of the bigger red flags to me, that they don't know what they're doing, that they're prioritizing the wrong things, that maybe Tony La Russa is actually still the de facto president of baseball ops here. Again, his defense was terrible. His offense was terrible. He was basically the only player who's been arguably as bad as him this season is Andrew Benintendi, which in some ways isn't this front office's fault. They didn't sign him. But even though Corey Lee has come back down to earth, he's still been a credible major leaguer this season. Like, he's not the worst defensive catcher in the majors like Maldonado arguably was. And he's not the worst offensive catcher in the major, or offensive player in the majors. He's been fallen off to sort of well below average. But, plenty of teams have starting catchers of Corey Lee's quality and have in recent years. It's the Maldonado thing that was really standing out. It's like, how are you guys putting up with this? So they finally DFA'd him. It goes back to a few things. One is the lying, the just sort of lying to the media. And I understand that when a player is as bad as Maldonado, you're left, and you're still playing him, you're kind of left only with dumb explanations, like the intangibles and his defense and pitch calling and helping young pitchers and blah, 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 blah. It's curious that they would DFA him now, as the pitching staff presumably is going to get younger in the next few months, as some of these older pitchers are presumably traded or let go, or as prospects, even not noteworthy ones, but, relief prospects or fifth starter types work their way up. And that was the stated goal. They were saying, well, we want him to work with the young pitchers. And he didn't really do much of that. I suppose maybe Cannon and Crochet benefited somewhat. We can't really know. So they cut bait on him before that, after putting up with some really awful, historically awful performance for a very long time. And like I've mentioned, he was the biggest free agent signing. We're also sort of a Corey Lee completely unforeseen hot streak away from this having been a truly awful position group. Like, if Lee had continued the way he had last year, you're looking at two guys whose OPS combined might have been like 600, which just adding them up together, which is terrifying. That's what you were looking at. they're underperforming their run differential. At least they were by 7 or 8 games last time I checked. That was a few games ago. So, the bullpen's been terrible. The manager's been terrible. They seem to be doing some very desperation moves around the margins, signing a 29-year-old Nick Senzel to, and to dump Lenny Sosa, who'd been hitting a lot better in recent months, strikes me as a panic move to try to avoid, you know, what's 162 minus like 35, winning only 35 games. Like, I think they're probably pretty desperate to get into the low 40s to avoid being so much of a historical catastrophe. And they're running out of time, so I guess they figure Senzel is decent against left-handed pitchers, and anything they can do to shore this up would be worthwhile. But there really aren't that many position players at all who are worth following, and I'm under no illusions that Lenny Sosa is going to be a future star or something like that. But he's like 24. He's been a top 10 prospect for you before. He's performed well in AAA for a while, and he's never really gotten going in the majors until now. In this current major league hitting environment, having an OPS of 700 for a month is actually saying, like, hey, you're a pretty decent major league hitter, or show that you could be. So to option him down to make room for Senzel is it makes me raise an eyebrow. It's a reminder that Benintendi's continued presence just really destroys any sort of flexibility of your roster. I mean, he's just anchored into left field, because if you got rid of him, you could have Senzel and Sosa if you wanted. It's not like Benintendi's helping the team at all. He's still terrible, even though he's hitting like a little bit better lately. I think by DRC Plus likes him a little bit better than his results. It shows him as below average rather than the 540 OPS that he has. And I think FRAA might like his defense better than I would expect. But again, it's just weirdly clinging on to old guys or washed guys in some spots of the roster, not giving young guys a chance, even when those older guys are not helping you stave off disaster. So those aspects of the roster management are troubling to me. It's possible ownership has said, no, I'm not paying Benintendi to not play. Seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Seems very much like a sunk cost, but that's that's the status quo. So because I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on Senzel, but it seems weird to mothball the only younger player who's showing any signs other than maybe Corey Lee, if you consider him younger, in his mid-20s. So that's disappointing. I assume Sosa will come back soon. He'll presumably DeYoung and maybe Nicky Lopez will be gone, or Nicky Lopez will slide over to short, or Brooks Baldwin will play short. Brooks Baldwin's a cool promotion. I mean, he was a 12th round draft pick. He had a very contact-driven, very good performance in the high minors. He plays multiple positions, including shortstop. He's very unusual, particularly for the White Sox, but any 12th round pick. So I think giving him some run is the type of thing that might make the season less depressing, because as we've discussed, it's just not only are they so bad, but it's so many of these guys are retreads, and there's no real, even if, I guess you're vaguely hoping for Tommy Pham to get hot again so you can flip him in a week. But it does bring me back to some of the few victories that Getz has had this season is signing Tommy Pham. But honestly, he's come back down to earth, and he's, fine. Somebody might want him. They might not, honestly. Maybe just because he fits on so many rosters, like someone will take him. But anybody had a chance to sign him before, and they didn't. And he's back down to a league average OPS or something like that, or getting close to it. So if that's your big victory, it's really not saying much. Paul DeYoung is still hovering around a league average bat. If you were going to get a new stopgap shortstop for this season, looking at the free agents available, he's about as good as you could have hoped. But I don't know what he's going to get you at the deadline. And at this point, you're probably just more interested in clearing the logjam so you can give plate appearances to players who you actually might use going forward. Um, so we're we're casting about for victories for Getz, and they're very few and far between. Bannister, I'll take the L on saying that hiring wasn't as good as people thought. I had talked to a few people in the industry who thought he might have fallen behind the curve, but it seems like he's still pretty good at his job. He's getting good results. Apparently, he fixed like Eater's breaking pitch in a bullpen session. He was apparently involved with Fetty. He was apparently involved with any number of pitching improvements that we've seen throughout the system. We'll see how many translate to the majors. Cannon has struggled, but he's shown some flashes, and he was sort of a non-prospect. And so for him to come in and even show signs that he could be a back-end starter would be a big developmental win. So Bannister, and then sort of the peripheral victories of Fetty and some of these other guys. We'll call those wins. Those are great. DeYoung and Pham seem okay. We're still seeing like a lot of Gavin Sheets, and I almost want to, it feels like this is a conversation. I almost want to be like, how old do you think Gavin Sheets is at this point? Because he turned 28 a few months ago. He's a guy where, I root for him. I like him. He's shown flashes of being competent, which has stuck out like a sore thumb on this roster. Anybody who has a good week or two sort of stands out a lot. But he's another guy where you could pretty realistically just get rid of him and give more run to people with more potential for improvement. And you'd be better served by doing that. And honestly, probably not lose that much. That's what's kind of scary, is they've been so bad that I think they're clinging to, a major leaguer who's like a roll 3, the 2080 scale, like a roll 3, like a well below average player. And out of desperation, hoping to white knuckle this group over 42 or 43 wins or whatever it might be. And in the process, they're losing chances to give run to players who might pop. I mean, the trade deadline is a very good opportunity to clear some space, but Sheets, Benintendi, we were seeing Corey Julks for a while, and I feel like we haven't seen him in a while again, and that's those appearances are going to Benintendi again, and I don't really know why. I don't really know why. I'd honestly be tempted to, even if you don't want to DFA Benintendi, be tempted to just put him on the 60-day IL and say, hey, dude, like, go get healthy. We'll tell everyone you were injured. Let the Achilles get to 100%. Let your hands, do whatever you need to do, rehab, and we'll give you one more go next season and see what happens. I think it would be in his interest to say, yeah, this isn't me at my best, and I've still got something in the tank, because like, if he's saying, no, I'm healthy and I can do this, and these are the results he's posting, not a great sign for the rest of his career. So very weird deference to very, very bad veterans. That could be Pedro. And again, hanging on to Pedro instead of even just promoting Charlie Montoyo and getting Pedro out of there. Pedro does seem to hate young players, which is a really rough trait for somebody that you want, where you're doing a rebuild. So yeah, the draft happened as well. I want to caveat this heavily, as I always do, but I'm a few years removed from doing day-to-day prospect work, and even then, I was talking to people and reading work. I wasn't going out and scouting, so I deferred to other people's evaluations, figuring out who I trusted, and sort of reading between the lines and figuring out what types of traits could succeed, and using my own just sort of 20 plus years of experience of my instincts have gotten, like, not to my own horn, have gotten like pretty decent in terms of just saying, I don't know about this guy. Like I watched Casey Mize, and I just never really saw it. Certainly not to be like an ace. Once he got to the majors, he had already been too injured, and his stuff was diminished, and I just didn't see him as like a third time. For example, I've been wrong about guys too. I thought Tariq Skubal would never be able to be healthy and good as a starter, but clearly so far he's proved me wrong on that too. So just using Tigers pitchers, for example, um, not entirely based on my own information, it's from talking to people and then just sort of, but like Mize was somebody that everybody I was talking to, people who saw him were writing, I would get three different scouts would go watch him and they'd send me three different reports and each one would say, this guy's an ace because of a different pitch. Like each person was like, oh no, his cutter, oh his fastball, oh his this. And by the time he got to the majors, like I said, injuries had probably diminished him a bit, but he looked like a reliever to me. I just didn't see him going multiple times through an order successfully and holding up over a season. So, um, all that said, and throw in the fact that I don't really cover, I never really worked with the amateur draft. It just wasn't the main focus over at Baseball Prospectus. We had scouts who Keenan Lamb, who's since been hired by a team, was sending, did some evaluations for the draft, and a lot of them have looked, I think, have aged quite well. So the White Sox took Hagen Smith, 5th overall. I think he was a worthy pick at 5. I think look at any rankings, talk to anybody, he wasn't like a reach. Most people had him in the sort of 5, 6 on their boards. I think there was a big drop off at pitcher after him. It was sort of like there were kind of two guys, him being one of them, and then there was a big drop off. Was sort of the view. And he's clearly, the White Sox have had better success developing pitchers than they have position players. Like that's obviously true. I don't necessarily think that it's like, oh, he'll be the next Sale. Oh, he'll be the next Crochet. I think it's a little lazy. Obviously, it's a very easy connection to make. He's already had one Tommy John surgery, so there's risk there beyond even the normal pitcher who throws like crazy hard. I've been, as time goes on, I get more and more convinced that you should not be investing your main resources into pitching, particularly if you have a guy like Bannister or a system where you think you can turn second round picks into major league starters, minor league free agents, second or third pieces in trades to fill out your pitching staff. Every year we see Zach Eflin. He's not an ace, but he's good, and he was very affordable. People talk, oh, pitching so expensive, and it's like, it's relative to hitting. It's like kind of not, because there's like a lot of it. People don't tend to sign starting pitchers to big extensions because of the risk. They get hurt really easily. They decline really easily. Position players are much more stable. They last a lot longer. Their injuries tend to be a little bit more fluky than just the inherent activity of pitching, which seems to degrade. It's not a good for your body. So the other thing too is, you can go through historically even really good outlets and go through, look at their top pitching prospect in a given year. The track record on him is not great. It's really not good. Like Forrest Whitley never made it. Alex Reyes got hurt and he didn't make it. I can click around and see, but Carlos Rodon worked out as the number 3 pick, but I think also as the era goes on, each individual pitcher is throwing fewer and fewer innings. So of your percentage of innings in the pile you have for a season, you're just getting less and less from any individual player. Whereas position players, for the most part, if you have a good regular, they're going to play their 550, 600 plate appearances, and they're going to help you however much they help you. So I think this is reflected in the fact that out of the first 15 picks in this draft, there were 2 pitchers taken, including the White Sox and Chase Burns, which I think kind of surprised people a little bit at the top. So even and as we talk about those top pitching prospects sort of flaming out or really struggling or having a really high bust rate, those are guys who've already been in the pros usually for a year or two, maybe more, and have sort of, Casey Mize, have worked their way to major league proximity. And we know that each jump is really, really hard, and the gap between AAA and the majors is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So draft prospects, I think, are even further away. We have less data, less ability to project how they're going to do than you would say a Forrest Whitley at the time that he was top pitching prospect in the minors. So for all that, people are like, well, it's a safe pick. It's a safe pick. Like the White Sox are better at this than position players. I think that's a huge mistake. I think not in the sense that like Hagen Smith's probably going to be, he's a good bet to be a good pitcher. I couldn't help but laugh. This is reductive, but when people were like, oh, like imagine he could be the next ace. Like imagine, I was like, yeah, imagine a really good left-handed ace starting pitcher on the White Sox. It's like, they've had one for years. They had, Sale, they had Rodon for a little window where he was pitching like an ace. They have Crochet pitching like an ace now. And it's not to say that ace pitchers don't help you win. They certainly do, but it hasn't made a lick of difference in the White Sox success in the last like 15 years because they're so terrible on the position player side. Both sides of the ball, like the defense and hitting, have been awful since like 2008. So even as you show more signs of improving on your pitching development, to me, what that says is if Brian Bannister's good and his team is good, Ethan Katz, whatever, you should be able to do more with less. You should be able to put fewer resources into the pitching side and still be able to compete. The areas that you're bad at, you need to put more of your resources into to shore them up. Because I've said this before, I don't know where the position players are coming from. You're not going to fill out your whole lineup with Brooks Baldwin's coming out of nowhere from the 12th round. And like Caleb Bonham, cool pick. Looked like great value where they got him. I haven't seen whether they've signed him yet or not. Like that's a great pick in the second round. That's the type of thing they should be doing. I think passing on JJ Weatherholt is a huge mistake. Just all of my instincts when I was going through the just sort of descriptions of the players of the top 15 or 20 and places I could read about them, Weatherholt kind of popped out to me as like this profile sounds like the type of guy where years from now we're like, oh, how did 6 teams pass on this guy? Caglione, I'm not as, I mean, he could be cool. I could see not going for him. But Weatherholt just seems like such a no-brainer at 5. And I think they're really going to regret that. They're not really, they're capped at the 10th pick next year. They might be worse. They might be all the way down to 18. And if they're still picking the top 10 and the year after that, which as things are trending, I mean, they probably will be, then you're still looking for your sort of really blue chip hitting prospects to be coming from that. So, and then they'll be a few years away potentially. So you're really looking at this pick to me signals that they probably won't be any good for like 3-4 years at least. So, I mean, it's reductive. It's not just that. There's a lot of reasons why you might think that, but really, I really hated going for a pitcher there. People say go best player available. Don't draft for need, and I agree. But I think the risk of a pitcher and the impact of a pitcher, even if they turn out well, is so much lower than a position player that if they're anywhere close, I think you have to take the position player. And honestly, like Weatherholt and Smith I've seen them sort of on the same tier, or Weatherholt listed higher some places. It's not exact science. Weatherholt might suck. He might never get past hamstring injuries, whatever. But my product placement for the episode, I was really, really disappointed to see they went with the pitcher. Colson Montgomery's sort of stagnating a bit in AAA. Brian Ramos is certainly not a sure thing. He's a good prospect. He's not elite. I don't know who's going to hit, man. And we've seen the ripple effects of having a terrible offense where even if your pitching is good, it sort of harms itself, because if you're having to push all your pitchers to be in high stress situations all the time, even if you're going well, even if your team's good. We saw when the White Sox tried to turn to the bullpen. I think Jim Margolis has pointed this out, where you're like, oh, we've got Hendricks and Graveman and all these guys pitching well. Okay, all of your leads are like 1 or 2 run leads because you can't score. even if you pitch well. So you're like destroying your bullpen, pushing them into the end, and your starting pitchers hang on to these really tight leads, high stress pitches. You can never allow a base runner, never allow a home run, or you'll lose. So even if you're winning, you start to like overuse your good relievers. You never have mop up situations. You never have blowout wins. And I think we've seen a lot of the successful builds in recent years have been sort of high resource, really good position player cores, and you cycle through pitchers however you can, because you can find them in a lot of ways. You can get them at the trade deadline. You can get, you look at the Astros using high draft picks on George Springer and Kyle Tucker to some, and those are sort of like, those were guys that they had for a long time. And you had Verlander for a bit, who you got in a trade, and you had, a lot of inexpensive international free agents like Framber Valdez and Christian Javier, and Hunter Brown looks really good all of a sudden. And I don't think he was, maybe I just said something stupid. I don't think he was like a huge investment. Yeah, 5th round pick. That happens way more often with pitchers than it does with hitters, in my opinion. I guess I should go crunch the data, but I don't think I'd get much pushback from that. Really, really disappointing. Weatherhold shouldn't have been available at 5, frankly. You were really lucky. That was your chance. Even if Montgomery works out well, he might not stick at short. You could put him over at 3rd if Weatherhold sticks at short, or if Weatherhold's a second baseman. That's not the worst thing in the world either. So, yeah, here we are, a few days ahead of the trade deadline. I'm not really convinced anybody knows what they're doing beyond maybe some of the pitching stuff. Most of Getz's acquisitions have ranged from mediocre to terrible at the major league level, and those are the players that you can evaluate. So Nicky Lopez, been pretty awful. Paul DeYoung's been, we've talked about it, he's been all right. Fine. We'll see what they can get for him. Pham's been okay. Julks has been fine. They haven't really given him any time. The Dominic Fletcher trade is looking pretty terrible, even if Christian Mena doesn't turn out to be much, just because it's like, okay, you took a 25, 26-year-old guy with major league experience. You have a lot of data on him. And he was in the organization that your new assistant GM was from in Arizona. And he's been well below replacement level. You cut Pilar, and then he went off in that. Like, that's kind of... Deloach hasn't been any good. They picked... The guy they picked 3rd, Larson, another left-handed pitcher, I think, a prep arm. That was their 3rd pick. They got him from... If I'm not mistaken, they got him from the Soto trade from Seattle. They threw a comp pick in. This is the guy they took. It looks like a huge reach. Again, another pitcher. I don't know how many bullets you need to throw at this. They already spent an entire 2023 trade deadline acquiring only pitchers, and they've drafted a ton of second-round pitchers in recent years, like Cannon, Powlett. I'm trying to remember, but that's been a move they've been going to a lot. So it looks like they reached for this Larson guy. And that was basically a return for Soto. Like, you had a Rule 5 pick or a waivers acquisition come good. Like, he broke out as a reliever, and you ground him in the dust after Getz took over, way overworked him, messed up his arm. He kind of can't pitch or is just now coming back. You traded him for a comp pick, and you used it on nothing. Shoemake's been terrible. Basically, all the guys from the Aaron Bummer trade have been terrible. Flexen's been pretty bad. Brabia's had good peripherals, I guess. Steven Wilson's peripherals are pretty terrible. Schuster's peripherals are pretty terrible. I don't know, man. I don't think the hit rate on investments this low is going to be low, but I don't think they know what they're doing. Hope I'm wrong. So it'll be a short one today. But that's a mid-season thing. And, we'll see. I'm interested to see what they get back for Crochet. I hope it's not Spencer Jones. unless he's like the second player in a package, because his strikeout rate in Double A is like 40%, and he's 23. He's older than I realized. So, yeah, thank you for tuning in. This has been your White Sox Wasteland check-in, and yeah.